On a spring night in 2025, inside room number 3 at Indiana's death row facility, the fluorescent lights glared white. Benjamin Donnie Ritchie, the man responsible for the passing of a police officer, had just finished his last meal: fettuccine alfredo, lasagna, and chicken parmesan from Olive Garden. Indiana, a state often seen as quiet and reserved, has carried out more than 20 executions over the past 3 decades, and 7 more names still wait in the shadows for their moment to come. But not everyone bows their head. Some laughed. Some confessed to more than what the files ever revealed, and some never told the full story. Think you understand justice? Wait until you hear about them. These are 10 of the most chilling individuals, where darkness went far beyond the law, and even a death sentence wasn't enough to end the story. Before we begin, leave a comment below. Which country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far these stories have traveled. First, Benjamin Donnie Ritchie. In late September of 2000, the quiet suburb of Beech Grove, just outside Indianapolis, echoed with the sound of police sirens. Officer William Bill Tony, 31 years old and a new father, was dispatched to stop a stolen pickup truck. Behind the wheel was Benjamin Donnie Ritchie, just 20 years old, with a juvenile record and under supervision for theft. As Officer Tony leaned in to check the license plate, Ritchie pulled out a gun and fired 4 times. One shot pierced the officer's vest, ending his life right there on the roadside. No time to call for help. No one close enough to stop it. His death sent shockwaves through the Beech Grove community. He was the first officer ever to fall in the line of duty there. Ritchie was arrested shortly after and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors described it as a cold-blooded execution of a public servant. The courtroom and the public were torn when medical records revealed Ritchie had been born with brain damage caused by alcohol exposure, diagnosed with FASD, bipolar disorder, and lead poisoning from childhood. Could someone like that be fully responsible for his actions? The trial dragged on for nearly 25 years. On May 20th, 2025. After a 15-year pause in executions, Indiana carried out its final death sentence for Ritchie at the Michigan City Prison. His last meal was Olive Garden's Tour of Italy combo: fettuccine alfredo, lasagna, and chicken parmesan. Right before the injection, Ritchie said, "I love my family, my friends, and all the support I have gotten. I hope they all find peace." Outside, Officer Tony's widow stood silently, the final voice for a husband who could no longer speak. She told reporters, "It's time to close this chapter of my life." Their daughter, once just a newborn, grew up without a father, a loss no words could ever truly heal. To Ritchie's legal team, he was a man with severe, lifelong conditions beyond his control. But to the Tony family, the law wasn't a magic wand that could fix the damage. It was a tool to carry out judgment when a late apology could no longer mend what was broken. They waited nearly 25 years to see the final reckoning for the man who took away a husband, a father, not to bring something back, but to finally let go. Second, David Leon Woods. In 1984, in Garrett, a quiet suburb near Fort Wayne, Indiana, 77-year-old Juan Plasencia lived alone in a modest wooden home. One night in April, just after he turned off the lights to rest, 3 young men broke through his door. Among them was 19-year-old David Leon Woods, the one who led the plan to steal. Their targets were simple: an old TV and about $130 in cash. But this wasn't just a petty theft. During the struggle, Mr. Plasencia was injured and collapsed into his living room chair. The space was left in chaos. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered. After grabbing a few items, the intruders disappeared into the night. Police arrived to a disturbing scene and footprints left behind. It was terrifying, one investigator recalled, saying the scene was beyond what most people could bear, and calling it one of the most distressing cases of his entire career. Neighbors were shocked and heartbroken. Juan was known as a kind, soft-spoken man who lived alone and often chatted with those nearby. No one imagined that his quiet home, where he watered the plants each morning, would become the place where his life ended, alone in chaos he never caused. Woods and his two accomplices were quickly identified and arrested, thanks to a tip from someone close to the victim. The knife used in the attack was found discarded in a creek nearby. What shocked investigators most was Woods's demeanor. Cold and expressionless. A robbery had become something far more chilling in a town that had never known such fear. David Leon Woods was sentenced to death in 1985. For the next 22 years, the victim's family followed every appeal, waiting for justice to be carried out. On May 4, 2007, the execution took place at Michigan City Prison. For his final meal, Woods requested pizza and birthday cake, which he quietly shared with family in an unusual farewell. His last words were gentle, but never enough to erase the pain. "I want Mr. Juan's family to know that I am truly sorry for what I did." The Plasencia family did not attend the execution, but according to a neighbor, they had waited nearly a quarter century for what they believed was a fair ending. Though David Leon Woods ultimately paid the price, his death could never fill the space Mr. Juan left behind. An elderly man lost to a senseless break-in, and in this story, no words could ever fully ease the loss that his family would carry forever. Third, Michael Allen Lambert. In late 1990, 26-year-old Michael Allen Lambert was found drunk and taken into custody by police in Muncie, Indiana. But instead of being brought safely to the station, Lambert, still intoxicated and carrying a gun stolen from his workplace, turned around and shot Officer Greg Winters in the back, even while his hands were cuffed. Winters, the father of two young children, passed away days later due to severe injuries from the shooting. Prosecutors said Lambert fired 4 or 5 times, calling it a deliberate act of violence against an officer performing his duty. The Winters family was devastated. The Muncie community was stunned. An officer who was simply doing his job was taken in the very patrol car meant to protect him. In a 1992 trial, the jury agreed that the crime warranted the death penalty. In the years that followed, Lambert filed multiple appeals, arguing that he was too intoxicated to understand his actions when placed in the police car. But both Indiana courts and federal judges rejected the claim. On June 15, 2005, Lambert was executed at Michigan City Prison, the first execution following the death of another inmate just months earlier. He was offered a last meal, but chose not to eat. He also declined to speak, a silence that stood out in the execution chamber. Surprisingly, this death row inmate had another side. He was once gifted a 3-month-old kitten, which he saved for his son, a small gesture that revealed a different part of a man otherwise defined by judgment. The execution took place just after 12:01 in the morning. A staff member announced, "Michael Lambert is deceased," in a room filled with silence, broken only by the quiet murmurs of the victim's family watching behind the glass. The Winters family chose not to make a statement. They had waited 15 years for this legal moment to close a painful chapter. But for many in the community, Lambert's death left behind a question. Does capital punishment truly stop evil, or is it just a final sentence that can never heal the wounds? Fourth, Gerald Bivins. In January of 1991, Gerald Bivins, recently released on parole, joined 2 accomplices in a violent robbery that ended with the death of Pastor William Radcliffe. The attack happened at a rest stop off Interstate 65, just north of Indianapolis. Bivins later claimed that Radcliffe recognized him mid-theft, causing him to panic and take the life of a man who had once helped him through a recovery program. This wasn't just a shocking crime because the victim was a pastor. It also exposed how deeply parole could be abused. The courtroom was tense during the trial. The victim's family sat silently, as a representative testified that Radcliffe was a kind man who had made it his mission to help people rebuild their lives, including Bivins. The system had given Bivins a second chance. He returned it with a crime no amount of time or law could erase. The room fell still when someone described Bivins's actions as a betrayal of justice that cannot be softened, reflecting the deep anger and pain felt by the community. On March 14, 2001, Indiana carried out its final judgment on Bivins at Michigan City Prison. He became the 8th person executed since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1981. For the first time, he was allowed to eat a meal prepared by his mother in the prison kitchen, a closely supervised final meal of German ravioli and chicken dumplings. Just before the execution, Bivins said, "I wish to apologize to the victim's family for the pain I have caused them and for the pain I have caused my family and friends, and I ask that they be forgiven, and I ask that those that do this to me be forgiven." The Radcliffe family made no public comment. Those who attended the execution described a heavy silence. No crying, just the sense that the system had carried out its duty, but without offering true comfort to the ones left behind. 2 days later, Bivins' mother, who had stood beside him in the prison kitchen, attempted to take her own life in a nearby hotel. She later said the pain of losing her son was too much to bear. It was a haunting reminder that a crime doesn't only destroy one family, it casts a shadow on another. Gerald Bivins wasn't just another name on death row, he was a reflection of a parole system that failed to save him. A man once given a chance, who chose to betray that trust in the most brutal way. 5th, Marvin Bieghler. In December of 1981, Marvin Bieghler, a drug dealer in Howard County, Indiana, suspected that Tommy Miller was leaking information to the police. Acting on nothing more than suspicion, Bieghler and a friend broke into Miller's trailer in Russiaville. They shot and killed Tommy, who was just 20 years old, and his wife, Kimberly Jane Miller, 19 and pregnant. It wasn't just an act of revenge. It shattered a young family based on a baseless fear. Bieghler was sentenced to death and spent decades on Indiana's death row. He filed numerous appeals and challenged the legality of lethal injection. But both the federal courts and the United States Supreme Court rejected all attempts to delay the sentence. Members of the Miller family, including Kimberly's parents and younger brother, repeatedly urged the courts to uphold the death penalty. "The entire family has lived with this pain for over 2 decades," a representative stated during the clemency hearing. There was no miracle for Bieghler. On the night of January 26, 2006, about 8 hours before his execution, he asked to be baptized into the Catholic Church and received final rites from Father Thomas McNally, a spiritual turning point in his final hours. On January 27, 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court lifted the last stay issued by a lower court, clearing the way for Indiana to move forward. Bieghler was executed by lethal injection at around 1:17 in the morning. He became the 87th person executed in Indiana since 1900, and the 17th since the state reinstated capital punishment in 1977. His last meal was elaborate: shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings as an appetizer, New York strip steak, chicken breast, a baked potato, salad, and a can of 7-Up. A grand meal, as if preparing for the final judgment of justice. When asked if he had any last words, Bieghler replied, his voice rough, "Let's get it over with. No remorse, no apology, a cold farewell from a man sentenced to die, and from a justice system that had reached its conclusion." Soon after, a police officer from Howard County remarked, "This case is a tragic example of what baseless suspicion and hate can lead to." Even after more than 24 years, many still remember the lives of Tommy and Kimberly Miller were never returned. 6th, William Clyde Gibson III. On a morning in April of 2012, the city of New Albany, Indiana, was shaken by the discovery of 75-year-old Christine Whitus, found lifeless in the garage of her own home. She had been a close friend of William Clyde Gibson III's mother, who had passed away not long before. Still mourning the loss of her friend, Christine had gone to Gibson's house to offer comfort. But that visit would be her last. At first, authorities believed it was an isolated case, but as they searched the property, a second body was found. 35-year-old Stephanie Kirk, who had been reported missing weeks earlier, buried in Gibson's backyard. Then, DNA evidence linked him to an unsolved murder in Florida, dating back to 2002. The victim was Karen Hodella. 3 victims, 3 stories. 3 lives ended quietly. All had one thing in common. They trusted, or at least never feared, William Clyde Gibson. When arrested, Gibson confessed that the known victims were not even 1/10 of what he had done. That chilling claim stunned investigators. Medical and psychological reports revealed that he had prior convictions for assault, had undergone psychiatric treatment, and was long considered a high-risk individual for violent behavior. Police described the backyard search as unearthing layers of hell, each patch of dirt turned over, each trace examined. And with every new piece of evidence, the horror grew deeper. They weren't just finding remains. They were uncovering the buried questions of a violent past that should have been stopped long ago. On November 26, 2013, Gibson received his first death sentence for the killing of Christine Whitus. On April 15, 2014, another death sentence was added for the murder of Stephanie Kirk. Though he appealed, every request was denied. The court ruled that the brutality, his criminal record, and his attitude showed no room for mercy. While imprisoned at Michigan City, Gibson rarely spoke to the media. But he did appear in the documentary Inside Death Row and on the True Crime podcast Where the Bodies Are Buried, where he hinted again that there were more victims than the official count. To this day, William Clyde Gibson III remains on death row. But for many in Indiana, what they await isn't just justice, it's the names of those still missing, the victims never found, the souls never called by name. 7th, Jeffrey Allen Weisheit. On the night of April 10, 2010, in Evansville, Indiana, Jeffrey Weisheit was watching over his girlfriend's 2 children, 8-year-old Alyssa and 5-year-old Caleb, in a small wooden home off Fisher Road. But soon, neighbors saw heavy smoke and flames rising from the house. The fire began in the children's bedroom and spread fast long before help could arrive. When police and firefighters extinguished the flames, they found Caleb tied to a mattress, gagged. Alyssa was motionless inside a closet. Both children had lost their lives from smoke inhalation. Investigators described the scene as utterly heartbreaking, overwhelmed by horror. Meanwhile, Weisheit had fled. He left the burning house behind. A few hours later, federal agents captured him in Kentucky after a high-speed chase. He resisted arrest, attempted to harm himself, and declared he wanted to die because he was tired of living. At trial in June of 2013, Weisheit was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and arson resulting in serious harm. His defense team cited schizophrenia and uncontrollable bipolar disorder. But the court heard about 2 innocent children, taken in a blaze that was, as the prosecution argued, an act of extreme violence meant to hide another crime. The courtroom was visibly moved. The family of Lisa Lynch, mother of Alyssa and Caleb, submitted a tearful letter describing their children as joyful, loving, and full of life. They asked that the death penalty be enforced, so no one can ever repeat a crime like this. The Clark County judge agreed with the jury's recommendation, stating the act was not just brutal, but a deliberate destruction of the most innocent lives. By late 2018, both the Indiana Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court rejected Weisheit's appeals, confirming that the trial process and death sentence were legal and appropriate. Jeffrey Weisheit remains on death row, and with each passing day, the people of Evansville are reminded of one truth. The death penalty may not be the only answer, but it is sometimes the final period in a story far too cruel to continue. 8th, Kevin Charles Isom. On the evening of August 6, 2007, gunfire erupted at the Lakeshore Dunes apartment complex in Gary, Indiana. Residents panicked and called the police. When the SWAT team reached the apartment of Kevin Charles Isom, they were met with a horrifying scene of a family tragedy. In the living room, the body of 40-year-old Cassandra Isom, Kevin's wife, was found lifeless. Inside the bedroom were 2 children, 13-year-old C. Andrea Cole and 16-year-old Michael Moore, Cassandra's children from a previous relationship, both brutally killed. When officers entered, Isom was lying unconscious in a pool of blood next to a .357 Magnum revolver. Police also recovered 2 other weapons, a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol, and a 12-gauge shotgun, both used in the killings. At the station, Isom offered no resistance. In his first statement, he said, "I can't believe I killed my family. This can't be real." But the evidence made it clear. This was not a sudden break. It was a calculated act. Witnesses revealed a history of domestic violence and reported heated arguments within the family just days before. Isom's trial began in November of 2012, after a previous attempt was canceled due to an incomplete jury. In February of 2013, the jury found him guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. Given the severity of the case, 3 victims, all family members, Isom was sentenced to 3 consecutive death penalties. He appealed multiple times, citing issues with jury selection and mental health concerns. But both the Indiana Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court upheld the sentences. To this day, Kevin Charles Isom remains on death row at Michigan City. No execution date has been set. The local community has not forgotten that night. Children who once played with Giandria and Michael are now grown. But the memory of flashing lights, sirens, and cries from grieving relatives still lingers. Kevin Isom's case was more than just the destruction of a family. It was a wake-up call about the consequences of unchecked domestic violence. Justice may have been served, but the loss of Cassandra and her children left behind wounds that will never fully heal in the heart of Gary. 9th, Eric Darnell Holmes. On the night of November 16, 1989, the Shoney's restaurant in Marion County, Indiana, was getting ready to close. Manager Charles Irvin, 30 years old, was checking the cash register. Teresa Blosel, a young employee just 20, was cleaning up after her shift. The night air was calm. The smell of fried oil still lingered in the kitchen, but neither of them would make it home. Hidden in a dark corner behind the counter, Eric Darnell Holmes, a former employee who had been fired, was waiting. He didn't come to apologize. He didn't come to talk. Along with an accomplice, he walked in carrying a knife, heading straight toward the foyer where Charles and Teresa had just stepped out. Their screams were smothered behind the walls. Charles was stabbed and collapsed. Teresa tried to fight back, but couldn't escape a fatal blow. One more employee was attacked, but survived. That person became the only witness, sharing the story in court with a trembling voice and haunted eyes. During the assault, Holmes spoke chilling words, almost like a ritual. "Murder in the first degree. This is the real truth. We will triumph." Investigators described the killing as an execution. The Marion County community was in shock. Shoney's, once a warm family dinner spot, was now surrounded by yellow tape and flashing lights. People gathered to light candles. Teresa's mother, Jean Blosel, couldn't believe it when she heard her daughter had died at the place where she last called home, saying, "Just one more hour and my shift's over." Holmes was captured in less than 48 hours. At his 1992 trial, he didn't deny his role. He also showed no remorse. Prosecutors called it a cold and senseless tragedy. The jury took only a few hours to deliver their decision, the death penalty. On March 26, 1993, the sentence was officially handed down. Holmes became one of the youngest inmates on Indiana's death row. Since then, he has filed numerous appeals, citing childhood trauma, mental health issues, and problems with jury selection. But both the Indiana Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld his sentence. Holmes remains on death row in Michigan City. More than 35 years after the crime, there is still no scheduled execution. During one court review, an aging investigator recalled, "I'll never forget the look in Teresa's eyes when we carried her out. She was still wearing her apron, still holding her little purse." Eric Holmes may have gone silent for over 3 decades. But for the Blosel and Irvin families, and for those who worked at Shoney's that night, the memories never fade. One shattering moment, and a justice process still echoing through the decades. 10th, Roy Lee Ward. On the early morning of July 11, 2001, the rural town of Dale, in Spencer County, Indiana, was just waking under soft sunlight. In a small home on a quiet street, 15-year-old Stacy Payne was getting ready for school like she did every morning. She changed into her uniform, ate breakfast, and packed her books, unaware that in just a few minutes, her home would become the site of a tragedy the town would never forget. As Stacy stepped into the kitchen, a stranger suddenly appeared at the back door. He walked in without knocking, without a word of warning, and introduced himself as Roy Lee Ward. He claimed he was looking for his lost dog. Stacy was confused, barely able to react when Ward overpowered her with force. Her voice cried out, "Please stop," just loud enough to wake her younger sister Melissa, who was asleep upstairs. Melissa rushed down the stairs in a panic and saw her sister pinned to the kitchen floor, her face pale with fear. Without thinking, she grabbed the phone and dialed 911, trying to explain what she had seen between sobs. Police arrived within minutes. When they forced their way into the house, they found Stacy lying motionless on the cold tile. She had suffered severe injuries to her neck and abdomen, wounds so devastating that an emergency doctor later confirmed there was no chance of survival from the very beginning. Roy Lee Ward was apprehended at the scene. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. Officers handcuffed him and led him outside. One officer recalled, he didn't fight. He just stood there, looking around like he was the one who had been wrongly arrested. That moment, a man standing calm after an unspeakable act, a young girl lifeless on the kitchen floor, and her sister trembling with the phone in hand, stayed with everyone who was there. And from that moment on, Dale would never feel like an innocent town again. The first trial in 2002 was canceled due to overwhelming media coverage. In the second trial, held in 2007, Ward was convicted of rape and first-degree murder. The jury found 3 aggravating factors: sexual assault, murder committed inside the victim's home, and a clear intent to kill, and sentenced him to death. Since then, Ward has filed numerous appeals, challenging jury selection, citing mental illness, and accusing the media of bias. But both the Indiana Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the ruling, firmly stating that the death sentence was appropriate. In 2019, he again claimed the death penalty was unconstitutional, and again, the court denied his plea. Today, Roy Lee Ward remains on death row at Michigan City. No execution date has been set. In Dale, a town that once felt safe, the memory of Stacy, the girl in her bright white school uniform, still lingers. And while justice may have been served, the question remains: can a death sentence ever restore trust to a grieving town or bring healing to the family of a 15-year-old girl? 10 names, 10 death sentences. But the pain cannot be counted. Each story you've heard is more than a case file. It is a tragedy with echoes that never fade. A child without a mother, a husband left without a wife, parents holding a photograph they'll never update. Among the inmates on this list, some have died, others remain, but all have left behind holes that no sentence could ever fill. Justice may arrive late. It may never feel complete. But the truth deserves to be told. Not to stir anger, but to remind us that every stolen life deserves to be remembered. By name, by face, by a story that will not be forgotten. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, for justice, for empathy, and for those who cannot speak, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. What does justice mean to a family that has lost everything? Leave your answer, because sometimes justice isn't in the verdict. It's in the fact that we still remember who they were.